Morning colleagues, sorry for the slight delay, we're having technology problems. I'd like to welcome you to the Housing Subcommittee for the 20th of March. I would just like to remind everybody that we are being recorded and it will be available for public consumption at the appropriate time. Do we have any apologies? The Sederunt, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Just one apology this morning from Dennis Mail.
Also apologies from Jeff Lever.
Thank you, noted.
If we move on to declarations of interest. Councillor Carson.
Chair, I declare an interest in item 4. I'm a director of a company that provides service to the food train, and as such I'll leave the room while that's being dealt with.
Yeah, thanks. If it's all right with members of the committee, when we get to item 4, I would intend taking the food train first, although it appears last on the list. So as Councillor Carson can go out and then come back in for the rest. We'll do the food train one first, if that's okay with everybody else. Thank you. Move on to item 3. We were going to be having a short video regarding the National Housing Trust properties. Unfortunately, our technology isn't working. We can't get the YouTube to actually play on the screen, so I'll just ask Mr. O'Neill to give us a short verbal update on the subject, please.
Yep, thanks, Chair. What we're going to show members was a promotional video produced by Robertson Homes because the first 9 units have now been let out. Just to remind members, what this is a participation in the National Housing Trust scheme and the Council's funding, or joint funding 69 units in the Marchfield site in Dumfries. The first 9 units were advertised and the letting agents were inundated with applications. Demand for them is huge, absolutely huge, and there will be no difficulty, or we don't anticipate any difficulty at all, letting the total of 69 units. They've been delivered in phases, and the next phase is due off-site in the next couple of weeks, and the whole development will be built out by mid-summer, we anticipate, and at that point we'll have the whole 69 units available for mid-market rent in that location. So in terms of any kind of risks that we thought the Council may be exposed to in terms of demand and ability to finance the scheme, those risks have been shown not to be there, and there will be no difficulty letting the properties. And the video was just actually going to show you what the properties look like inside. They've been developed to a very high standard, so they've been let part furnished, which includes white goods and carpets, and as I say, very, very popular development. So I'd be quite happy to answer any questions that members may have.
Councillor Collins.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Jim. I just wonder, on the back of the applicants coming forward to rent these properties, have we got a level of information that would give us indicative figures of the level of demand and what pressures we might face in that regard?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I don't have the figures to hand, but it would be fairly easy to get. So what I could do is contact the letting agent, get their latest figures, and I could email them to members of the Housing Subcommittee just to give you a feel for the actual numbers. In terms of the first 9 properties, they were on the website for a day, and my recollection was that in one day they had about 45 applicants for 9 properties, so they just had to take the advert down because right away it was massively oversubscribed. So it's that kind of mismatch between the supply and demand. It's not marginal. There's way more interest than there are properties.
Do you want back in?
Thanks, Chair. I think there's some cause for concern here, and the sooner we can get a clearer handle on the sort of pressures that there are, or the expectations and numbers that there are out there, then the more helpful that would be for members in forming future discussions.
Councillor Colours.
Thanks, Chairman. I think, just reflecting back to when this came through committee and such like, I think it was £9 million investment, was it over 10 years? I think the very attractive thing for people with this in particular, I remember sitting at Causal at the time and National Housing Trust had been through the first year at an executive group, and they were trying to put it to bed. And I said that we were actually within a hair's breadth the first year, and we just missed it. The second year we came back, we made it work, certainly. But I think the attractive thing for the public out there with the right to buy, just for a recollection, that made it really attractive. Because we've got mid-market here for the private sector, we'll have it for the RSLs as well. So I think this has the right to buy. I don't think the mid-markets for the RSLs have that same right to buy. I think it's a different way of working. So I would imagine that would be one of the main factors that would attract folks. Just some clarity on that, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. The way the scheme's been implemented is that Robertson Homes are operating a buy-to-let scheme in tandem with the mid-market rent, encouraging tenants to save during the duration of their tenancy, so that at the end of the 5 to 10 year period, the existing tenant has the first option to purchase the property, but there is a formal scheme in place to encourage them to save and raise their deposit over that period of time. But the first option to buy the property goes to the existing tenant.
Councillor Geddes.
Thanks, Chair. Tremendous demand, obviously. My question would be, how many of these applications emanate from Dumfries and Galloway, and how many emanate from outside Dumfries and Galloway? Now, I'm long enough in the tooth to know the rules and the regulations that apply, as it were, to housing allocations, in particular in relation to RSLs. But I don't know about other members, but I'm certainly experiencing a groundswell of opinion in relation to houses, as it were, coming up for allocation, and the perception being, in fact, that there doesn't seem to be any weighting even contemplated in relation to locality and to people living locally. In fact, I've had to face it no later than the early part of this week. And I can understand and indeed sympathise in many instances with the complaints which have been made. People coming into the area from elsewhere, they're here for a remarkably short period of time, houses come up for allocation, and they're being allocated in a fashion which very often, militates against the interests of local applicants, some of whom may already be in houses and are desperately needing larger accommodation, to cater for their family sizes, etc. And as I say, I'm sure I'm not alone of the 47 members of this authority in articulating these concerns.
Mr O'Neill.
Thanks, Chair. I would like to allay Councillor Geddis's concerns. The way that this scheme operates is the applicants need to be registered with an RSL waiting list in Dumfries and Galloway, and because demand has been so large, an additional filter has been applied, and there is a test of residency as part of the allocation process. We're able to do that in this scheme because the allocations aren't subject to regulation by the housing regulator. So one of the filters that's been applied is that, as well as being on an RSL waiting list in Dumfries and Galloway, for this particular scheme, you have to be resident in Dumfries as well.
Come back in, Councillor Geddes.
Yes, with your leave, Chairman, I'm grateful. That is very reassuring and very helpful. It's a pity stunning my comments, and I was careful to include other schemes, RSLs. It's a pity we couldn't impose such a filter in the wider, within the wider parameters of RSL housing. Thank you.
Councillor Peacock.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering what the sort of proportionality in the properties that are being built, and I don't just mean the first 9, I mean the whole overall scheme, that are specifically for the disabled, or are there any on ground floor only that meet with all that, so we have the ability to put these out to a certain sector of people as well?
Yep, thanks, Chair. That's been considered through the building regulations that have been applied. So the properties all have disabled access, but as well as that, there is a large unallocated room in the ground floor of the properties, because they're either terraced or semi-detached, and they're all upstairs and downstairs. But they've been designed in such a way that if anyone with a disability is allocated one of the houses, there is a room available on the first floor that's readily converted into a downstairs bathroom. So they are accessible to people with disabilities and have been designed with that in mind.
Councillor Carruthers?
Just to remind me, is it all these on the same site? I think they are, aren't they? Just a reminder, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. The properties are all on the Marchfield site up towards Tesco's in the Lockerbie Road, and there's 69 of them in that one location.
And just to add, I think a really good news story for the council as a whole and the housing subcommittee in particular. Just well done to everybody concerned.
Do you want to reply to that? The briefing that you mentioned, Mr. O'Neill, I take it you're willing to get that out as soon as possible to all the committee members. Mr. O'Neill?
Thanks, Chair. I was just going to add, in terms of the briefing to members, we could also provide in that link through the email the link to the YouTube clip, so you can see for yourselves what we were trying to show you this morning. I don't think so.
Hopefully it'll work on our laptops. Thanks very much. Let's move on to item 4, the Housing Scotland Act 2006 review of schemes of assistance for 13-14. As I said earlier, we'll discuss the food train extra one first, so as Councillor Carson can leave and then come back in for the rest. I believe you're speaking to this, Mr. Lunch.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I've got nothing else to add to the report before members, but happy to take any questions. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Peacock.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think the food train offer a very good service in the services that they provide at the moment, and this intended service that we're looking to fund here. My only question would be on it is, would the service, the extra service that we're looking to fund within our scheme here, would that be limited to the private sector side of things? Because obviously the food train deal with the whole sector within Dumfries and Galloway, and I just wondered if this section of it would be limited to the private sector, because the funding to be allocated comes out with the scheme of the administration, which is solely for private sector landlords, owners.
Mr. Lynch.
Thanks, Chair. The food train extra is an existing project, and it's been running within the food train operation for some years, and it's offered to all tenures. There is nothing to prohibit the council funding this element across all tenures through the scheme of assistance. So it would not just be for private sector tenants or owner-occupiers, it would be across the sector, and it's really aimed at providing low-level housing support type intervention, links to the handy van and the small repair service, but it's a distinct service that's got a current client base. The issue that Food Train currently faces is that the current revenue funding is inadequate for them to keep operating at the current level, and certainly not be able to take on any more new clients because of the increased demand that they have and the increased complexity of some of the cases that they're dealing with. They're taking longer on an individual household to deal with those issues. So in conjunction with social work services, we were looking to split off the funding arrangements, the food train extra, which is more related to, as I say, the housing support service, fits within the scheme of assistance. Social work would continue to fund the core food train service, and that would then allow the whole operation to increase the capacity to keep going and expand.
Councillor Guinness.
Thanks, Chair. 3 minor questions, if I may. First one is paragraph 3.7.1. We're talking, for instance, about empty homes officer and bringing empty homes back into use. This work relies on joint working, particularly with community and customer services. I'd be interested in a specific instance of that joint working, would be the first question. Second one, sir, is 3.8, discretionary disabled adaptations. Talking about 2 extensions, and my question is, any idea at this stage of the likely timescales within which these properties will in fact be, as it were, completed, that this work will be completed? And the third one, Chair, is 3.9.7. We're talking about the trusted trader scheme there. Let me say for the record that I am basically supportive of what's being proposed, but in the last sentence, it's talking about funding £30,000 in year 1, 22,500 in year 2 and 15,000 in year 3 would bring the scheme to an operating level that could be sustained from trading standards budget from year 4 onwards. What would the scenario be if that's not capable of being the case?
I hope Mr. O'Neill's Mr. Lynch has wrote all that down. I'll bring you back in when Councillor Carson comes back in. We're just going to try and deal with the food train one at the minute. Councillor Dempster then, Councillor Carson.
Thanks, Chair. I have no difficulty with the food train one. I think the only question I have is I hope we're no entering into duplication, because the fire service don't just do fire safety checks, they do electrical appliance checks, they give advice on home safety, and I'm sure, unless I'm mistaken, they also fit them safety locks if it's felt necessary and if the tenant wants that. So there's no difficulty with it, other than I wouldn't want to see us just running about duplicating what's already being done by other agencies. And the fire service has been given great credit over the years for the sterling work they've done in that particular field. And I think the other thing, and I'll maybe ask that when Councillor Carson comes back in, that we're absolutely sure that handy van is available region-wide, because, sorry referring to it here, but if it's not available in certain areas, then really it's not practical. But that's nothing to do with the proposal that I'm quite comfortable with.
Thanks, Chair. As part of the process for preparing the report, I received a detailed submission from the social work lead officer for Food Train, and she's confirmed that there is no duplication of services across the region. That was part of her remit, to make sure that there was no duplication, and I've got that formally from social work services with the request to fund, so hopefully I can assure members on that point.
Councillor Carlos.
Happy to agree, 2.7.
If members are otherwise minded, I'm especially willing to agree to that as well, considering that the food train extra actually is aimed towards and used by our older and more vulnerable households. Are members agreed? Yeah, Councillor Peacock.
Just a quick point, Chair. Is this going to be reviewed annually, or are we agreeing this as a 1-year term at this present time, or are we looking to agree on a continual basis here?
Mr. O'Neill. Lynch.
Thanks, Chair. It's an annual allocation, and we've brought back the scheme of assistance for review and agreement to members every year since its inception in 2010. So it's a requirement to come back each year, and all the contractors and providers are aware that it's an annual allocation of funds.
If members are content to agree 4.7, I'll ask if Councillor Carson can come back in. We'll give him a minute. Hopefully he's been listening. We'll move on to the rest of the report. I'll ask Mr. O'Neill if he took a note. Sorry, I'll get this right. Yeah, Mr. Lynch, if he took a note of all the questions of Councillor Geddes, or whether he wants them to be repeated.
Thanks, Chair. I've got the questions from Councillor Geddes. The first one related to the Empty Homes project and the work that we're doing with the wider CCS service. That particularly relates to the work that we're doing with our revenues and benefits teams in identifying potential empty properties, dealing with owners, and making sure that we've got a connection through there. That work is ongoing, it's well established. And Revs and Benefits Service also work with landlord registration and HMO licensing, so it's something that we've been developing over the last number of years. In terms of the 2 disabled adaptations, the discretionary grants, there was one that was agreed towards the middle end of last year. I can't remember, I think it was maybe September. I think that's due for completion over the next couple of months. The one that was agreed just in January there, that's going to take longer time, because obviously it was more complex and, as members will recall, quite a high tariff job. I think the timescale for that is broadly towards the middle end of the summer because of the scale of the works. But we'll obviously get regular updates through our Cairn Repair Steering Group that I chair, and we'll bring updates back to members on that. In terms of the Trusted Trader Scheme, the Trade and Standard Service are very confident that this 3-year sliding tariff of funding will be what's required. They've looked at models elsewhere with other local authorities operate similar schemes, and they've based it very much on the kind of best practice that's out there. If, I think, probably by the end of year 2, if it looks like the numbers don't stack up as originally conceived, then obviously there's an opportunity for members at the end of year 2, before the funding runs out completely, to reconsider, review and make any necessary amendments. And obviously, as part of the annual review, we'll provide updates to how successful the scheme is. But there has been quite a significant amount of work done by the Trade and Standards Service, also linked into the National Trade and Standards Service, and providing lots of background information. And the information that we've got is they're pretty confident that on those numbers, with the £500 membership and the number of potential contractors who'd be interested in the scheme, they think it's viable over that 3-year term.
You wish to come back in, Councillor Guinness?
Yeah, just to thank Mr Lynch for the responses. Extremely helpful. Thank you.
Councillor Dempster?
2 questions about the handy van. I know it was said that we proposed to roll it out across the region, and where it was being used, it was very effective, and it was well used and appreciated. Have we got to the stage of rolling it out across the region yet, or is it simply that some of us haven't seen the advertising, if you like, or making the public aware that such a service is available should they acquire it? Because for obvious reasons, it's a very good system and it apparently works very well. And therefore, it would be useful if it was rolled out right across the region if it's not been done. And I think the other question I've got is maybe a more complex one. It's about the BTS, below tolerable standards, a report. And it's 361 and 362. It's proposed to amend the qualifying criteria to remove the conditions that the property is not the applicant's only principal home, or the applicant has not lived in the house for at least 6 months. Retain the following conditions. The owner acquired the house knowing its condition with a view to developing it. I know one case where both of these apply. The people actually inherited the property. They may never live in it, but how do they fit into an application of below tolerable standards when they acquired it knowing that it's conditioned, but that was because it came through the legal process? Do they qualify, or would that still be a case of they would have to invest in it themselves, given that they knew the condition of it when they accepted it?
Mr Lynch?
Thanks, Chair. In terms of the first question, the handy van service, the proposal before members is to increase funding by £38,000 to ensure that we can roll out the service across the region. It currently operates with one handy van and one handyman who's trying to cover the whole of the region, which means that it's spread too thinly. The proposal here is to basically double that provision. So the £38,000 will provide for an additional full-time handy van based in the west of the region. That will then create capacity for the existing operation to cover other areas that have maybe not had as much service as possible. And be able to get into, although it's currently available across the region, obviously with just a single operative, the amount of coverage has been limited. So we're looking to basically double the capacity of the handy van service. In relation to the second point, we would need to probably look at each case and its merits, because one of the situations that we're trying to deal with also is the issue of long-term empty properties where a surcharge is being applied. Surcharges may be applied in situations that you've described where people have inherited the property. There is a period of grace essentially where you can decide what you want to do with the property, and we'd need to have those discussions with the with the principal officer in the revenues team who's got the delegated authority to apply the charge or not, but it could be through that discussion that individual cases where they've inherited the property, so it's not been a kind of conscious commercial decision, if you like, to purchase a property to improve it and then saying the council are going to subsidise me. We would need to look at that. There's enough flexibility within the suite of conditions that we've got to allow that to happen. So we're aware that there are complexities there. What we've tried to cover is as many eventualities as we can, and we've got the delegated authority to look at them on a case-by-case basis, linking to the council tax charge issue, and making sure that we try and treat each case sensibly and reasonably within the broad parameters of the scheme.
Councillor Collins.
Thanks, Chair. I do recognise that the Trusted Trader scheme is very successful in other areas, and I wonder if in any of those other areas there's an exclusivity given to the Trusted Trader scheme. That's to say that only they are able to operate in a given territory, whether that applies anywhere else, and if that's been forming any part of any considerations in taking the scheme forward.
Mr Lynch.
Thanks, Chair. I'm not aware that any arrangement like that would or could operate. We'd need to take advice from both our trading standards colleagues and legal services about whether or not that could be applied. That's not the terms of the scheme that's before you. What we're looking at is a kind of voluntary membership arrangement where we're looking for active participation from trusted contractors, reliable contractors, and it's through that process that you would then exclude some of the maybe poor practice contractors that are out there. Taking it beyond that, I really don't think I could advise members whether that would be possible or safe to do. My suspicion is that we would not be able to apply any further exclusivity arrangements. One thing that we could look at if the council corporately are going down that route is to link it to any kind of approved contractors that the council operates. But what we're looking at here is as contractors that focus primarily on residential repairs and improvements. But if the scheme's expanded, then we could maybe link into what the council does in terms of corporate commissioning for contractors. But I think that's probably a fair few steps down the road.
Councillor Collins.
Thanks, Chair. I am considering it from the point of view of once a scheme has been established. I was just wondering if that was an experience that had been had elsewhere. And I'm sure all members are very well aware of the degree of upset and alarm that this can cause people when they get the con men and are conned out of sometimes tens of thousands of pounds as a result. And I see great benefits in this in giving comfort to residents right across the region, and any means by which that comfort can be extended, I think, is worthy of exploration. But I thank Mr Lynch for his answer.
Councillor Crullers.
Thanks, Chairman. In regards to recommendation 2.4, it's covered for 3.5 and 3.6. One if I could ask just for a quick resume of that. I've got a few questions on that, points of understanding, but could I just have a quick outline of what that actually means, the changes and so on and so forth to the low tolerable standards, please?
Mr Lynch.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. The changes that we are proposing are contained in paragraphs, well, from 3.65 down to 3.610. And essentially, the driver for it is set out at 3.6.5, where we're looking to initially improve the efficiency of the grant assessment and administration process. What that means is, put simply, is that both for council officers and also for applicants, the current process is very cumbersome and time-consuming. And what we're finding is that quite a high number of initial inquiries are not being followed through just because of the quite cumbersome and bureaucratic way that we have to try and gather in financial information to carry out the financial assessments. The result of that is that we're not getting take-up that we think the demand's out there. There's clearly plenty of BTS properties out there, but people are basically being put off because of the bureaucratic nature of the scheme. So we're trying to simplify it. What we are proposing to do, therefore, first measure 3.6.7 is to have the passported arrangement. So if applicants are on any particular prescribed benefits, they would then be passported straight through to 100% grant. And that's a very simple and effective way that to operate. We operate similar arrangements with the care and repair scheme for older people who are looking to get a care and repair assistance. Over and above that, we're looking to apply a flat rate 50% for any owner-occupier who is tackling a BTS property. So just to reassure members, this is not to carry out home improvements. This is to tackle quite serious BTS issues like structural instability, making sure you've got a wholesome supply of water. So dealing with, for example, if you've got old lead pipes for your water supply, tackling those kind of issues. So we're suggesting a flat rate 50% for all owners. And then below that, in terms of trying to proactively engage with the private rented sector and deal with stock condition issues within the private rented sector, we're suggesting a 30% flat rate. Now, either, there's an option in there for members at 3.6.9, either a flat rate for any private landlord who's got a BTS property to apply for a 30% grant to tackle BTS issues, or to focus it in on landlords who have got properties within communal blocks where RSLs are looking to carry out capital programs, and without engagement of the private landlords, they're often inhibited and they can't complete the capital program. If you go for the flat rate 30% for all landlords, that would encompass that situation as well. So that would be across the board, or you may wish to narrow it down. I think our advice is that a flat rate across the board would be a much simpler way to operate and make sure that we're trying to cover as many properties as possible. And then the third element links to the decision that members made about applying the surcharge for long-term empties, the council tax surcharge. And I think when we took that report to Policy and Resources, members were concerned that that was a big stick, but where was the carrot to encourage owners of these long-term empties to engage? So we've our specific provision within the scheme for anyone who's been subject to that surcharge, where there's BTS issues, to also apply for a 30% grant to bring that property back into use and get those properties utilised again. It's a much broader proposal, and obviously what we've got is a finite budget. So what we're suggesting at 3.6.11 is that the cap of 350,000 would apply, and we would operate on subject to people meeting the conditions under BTS. A cap would apply on that budget, and once that money's spent, that's it for the year. So we're not exposing the council to indefinite and unidentifiable financial risk, but we are targeting it more broadly to try and make sure that we utilise the money better. So essentially that's what we're proposing in the report.
Okay, no, thanks very much. That was a really good explanation, and you picked up on the points, in particular what I was concerned about, which was under 3.6.5 and 3.6.9. So just for absolute reassurance, because it was really about the combined, when you've got private sector and RSLs, there's no detraction in one direction or another. This is about maximising the effect of the money that we've actually got, and it's no detracting away from one or the other, really. Yep. Okay, thanks for that.
Councillor Peacock.
Thank you, Chair. I have a few points as well. John sort of touched on some of them, but maybe a little bit more detail on one or two of those points. In 3.4, the care and repair, whilst we on the performance figures there, which are very encouraging, and there's no complaints about them, and they really speak for themselves. But I was just wondering, out of the 1.5 million budget that's been allocated to that, how much of that budget has actually been spent? Has it been completely spent, or do we have some left over to either carry forward? And I don't expect Mr Lynch to have the information now, but can he determine how much has actually been spent on the private rural sector within the care and repair budget? So that would be one point, Chair. Another issue, again, Mr Lynch touched on it with the fact that the uptake on the BTS has maybe been a little bit less than expected, although the demand's there because of the reasons you've mentioned. So has that budget, the budget that was allocated to that, been fully expended, or is do we still have some, because of the reasons that you mentioned, because of the administration of applying for the grants? Moving on with the grants in the BTS on 3.6.9 there with the flat rate that we mentioned, I wonder if we should stipulate that when applying for these grants, if the private landlords that would be applying for them should be accredited to receive these grants. Obviously, they'll be registered landlords, but should we possibly encourage them to be accredited? That way, I feel that we would be improving tenancy management as well as property management, and it might give this committee a bit more scrutiny on the grants awarded in that issue. And on the trader scheme, again, I think it's a very good scheme. I think it would encourage a lot of bona fide traders to come forward and give them the benefit of knowing between the customers and themselves that everything is being done on a full and proper manner. I did have a couple of points on there, but I think Brian sort of covered a lot on that. Just a quick one was, it mentions in 3.9.6 that in future years we may encourage other business sectors to be involved with that, and I just wondered if you could inform us what those other business sectors might be.
Mr Lynch.
Thanks, Chair. Quite a number of questions there. I'll try and work my way through. Stop me if I've missed one. In terms of the care and repair budget and forecast spend, obviously we've not got to the end of year figure yet, but there's a slight underspend. I think we're looking at maybe about 80,000 underspend at the year end, and that will be carried forward and committed into next year. That's managed through the Care and Repair Steering Group that I chair. We meet on a monthly basis, so we regularly monitor the budget against its spend and go through that in some detail. In terms of the split between care and repair clients, whether it's rural or in some of the larger towns, I haven't got that information. We can certainly ask the care and repair manager to produce that. I think he'd be able to do that on a breakdown of postcodes, so I think we can provide that information for members. In terms of the BTS budget, again, there is an underspend. I can't remember the exact figure, but I think it's probably in the region of maybe 30% underspent at the minute, and that's one of the reasons why we're looking to broaden it to increase uptake. But again, we'll get the exact figures back for members. The proposal to link any BTS grant for private landlords with the accreditation scheme, that's certainly something that we could look at. Members will be aware that we are formal partners of the Landlord Accreditation Scotland scheme. One of the things that I think we'd need to talk to them about is whether or not the accreditation would need to happen in advance, because one of the tests is to get feedback from existing tenants. And if it's a prospective landlord who's got a property that's empty because it's BTS, they may not have a tenant, so there might be a condition more appropriate to say you would need to be accredited within a certain period of getting the property relet. But I wouldn't have any difficulty with applying that, and that would then strengthen the links between what the local authority is doing and the accreditation scheme. So quite happy to take that recommendation on board. Was there one more question, sorry?
Just the other business sectors that may be introduced into the trader scheme.
That's obviously something that our trading standards colleagues are leading on, and I think their approach would be incremental, because they couldn't move from dealing with essentially contractors in the home improvement residential sector to taking on all business activity. So I think it'd be based on what they see to be the next key problem area. Based on the information, their data and their experience, home improvements and repairs is a significant problem for them. And I think as the scheme develops, they would then identify the other sectors in which they would wish to roll the scheme out to. But we'd need to rely on their advice in terms of the next steps. That would then be subject to future reports. I don't think there's any intention at this stage to broaden it very quickly. I think we'd look to establish this scheme within this sector, so it would be for future years once it becomes essentially self-funding.
Councillor Geddes.
Well, going back, sir, if I may, to paragraph 3.6.9, for the record, I mean, my view is that, you know, the proposal, the so-called alternative approach, would be unduly restrictive, and I don't think that this committee should have any truck with that whatsoever. It should be left on the basis of, you know, introducing a flat rate 30% grant support for private sector landlords. Insofar as Councillor Peacock's suggestion is concerned about, you know, restricting that to accredited landlords, I would have to be convinced about that. I think it's not appropriate, in my view, to come to that decision today, because otherwise you leave yourself open to the charge of making policy in the hoof. I think it's worthwhile, by all means, exploring it, and I think it should be the subject of a further report. But as I say, I perhaps maybe I misunderstood Mr. Lynch, but I picked up from his reply that he would be quite prepared to incorporate that today. And as I say, I'd be a bit apprehensive about that. I think we need a bit more information, though I understand and I'm not averse to the principle behind the suggestion. Let me make that clear. My real issue, sir, is if you go to the recommendations in section 2 of the report, are we sure that we've covered at 2.4, covered all of the issues that we want to cover in relation to below tolerable standards? Because we talk there about, you know, as detailed at 3.5 of the report, and to me, if you're looking at 3.6.1 and 3.6.2, as Jim Dempster has already raised, you know, I'm not too sure if these are adequately incorporated into that particular recommendation. And I think we maybe need to sort of spell it out just a wee bit more to ensure, in fact, that when we come to that decision, it's quite clear and unequivocal, Chair, that we are, in fact, and we have incorporated all of these points. If I'm getting the message, if I'm explaining the point I'm trying to make sufficiently clearly. As I say, if you look at 2.4, it just talks about 3.5, and if you go to 3.5, that's a comparatively bland section in the report in relation to below tolerable standards. There are a whole lot of issues there. As I say, 3.6, 3.61, 3.62 and 3.69, which to me would need to be incorporated on the basis of safeness into the decision that's eventually taken. And let me also say, Chair, for the record, 3.61, I'm aware of a particular case in point in a mid-Galloway village where the applicants, or where applicants in one case are RSL tenants, they have been left a house which is it's in a less than satisfactory condition. In fact, it's gone as far as I would say as almost creating blight conditions in the properties round about it, and they're keen, as it were, you know, to sort of get grant to work in the house, remaining in their RSL tenancy while they do so, get the house ready for occupation, give up the RSL tenancy, thereby getting an extra housing unit or a unit of housing stock in that part of the world and moving into this accommodation. So there's a classic case in point of why that, in my view at least, that recommendation, or these recommendations in 361 should in fact be embraced and should be agreed. But the real point I'm trying to make, sir, Chair, is that, you know, 2.4, does it incorporate all that it needs to incorporate in the report for BTS issues?
Mr. Lord.
Thanks, Chair. Just to clarify, in terms of the proposal from Councillor Peacock about linking the BTS with accreditation, I wasn't intending to say you can make that decision today. I did raise issues about the detail about linking in with how it would work in practice, but I'm happy to bring a report back to a future committee. We've got an additional committee on the 10th of April, so we could just do a quick update specifically on that issue once we've had opportunity to speak to Landlord Accreditation Scotland to see how that would work in practice. And in terms of the recommendations, absolutely support Councillor Geddes 2.4. That recommendation should read that agree to amend, including 3.5 and 3.6 of the report, and that covers all the changes. So apologies for the slight slip up in number in there.
Councillor Smith.
Thanks very much, Chair. I think most of the questions I had actually been covered in what John said just earlier. I'm just curious in terms of the impact on the budget of the changes that are being proposed. You've obviously got in the paragraph how the budget cap would actually work in 3.6.11, but I'm just curious as to what estimate you've given of the impact of the changes you're proposing on the actual budget, because it does obviously imply that once funding is effectively spent, you'll close the scheme and then you'll have to reapply future years. But what are we envisioning will actually happen? We're envisioning that the budget will effectively run out over a particular period of time, and what do you think the actual impact will be on the budget that's actually been set? The other question is going back to the handy van expansion, which I think is positive. How are we proposing to promote that over in the west of the region? Because presumably it's not utilised to any great extent there at the moment because of the fact that the one person is based over on this side of the region. So how we're planning on promoting that? And can you just what was the criteria? Can you just remind the criteria? There was people over 60 but registered disabled. Can you just remember what the criteria was again? But and when do you envisage that expansion actually being implemented?
Mr. Lodge.
Thanks, Chair. In terms of the excuse me, in terms of the overall budget position for BTS, obviously we've got a fixed budget of 350,000 that we're asking members to agree today. We anticipate that we will absolutely fully commit that budget for 14-15. The speed at which that is committed, we're not quite sure yet. I think what we would need to do is just see how the scheme operates, and if there's a need for a mid-term report to members, if it looks like we're getting through the budget much quicker than anticipated, then we bring that back for you to consider whether it's appropriate to increase the allocation for that budget. The potential would be that we could use further money from the Council Tax Second Homes Fund to top up that specific BTS budget if needed. But because we're changing the terms of the scheme quite radically, it's difficult to know exactly the level of demand that we'll get. So we'd like to keep that under review if possible, and if needed, bring a report back. If it looks like, say, by September, that budget will have been fully committed, then at least give members the opportunity to consider whether or not you'd want to top up that budget for the rest of the financial year, or you hold the position that the scheme is effectively closed till the start of the next financial year. So I think we'd keep that under close review. In terms of the promotion of the handy van service, it is currently promoted region-wide, and there are jobs completed over in the west, but it's by the operative who's based in the east. So it's just it's really the level of activity in the west rather than it not being in existence. So there has been quite an active promotion of the scheme across the region. That would just be accelerated and increased. But I'm aware that, for example, what was the old Annandale and Eskdale CVS that manage are out promoting the scheme to community councils, to the third sector, voluntary sector, or a range of organisations where they could seek referrals from, and that will increase given that the capacity hopefully will increase with the if members agree the funding today. And what was the third question, Councillor Smith? Sorry.
Just a reminder of the criteria again. I know it was people over 60, but I couldn't remember the rest of the criteria was for people to access the service.
I'd need to check, but I think I don't think it's I don't think you need to be in receipt of DLA. I think it's basically people who are over 60. Is that correct? Yeah, and there's no other further restriction.
Councillor Carson.
Yeah, I think all my questions have been answered. I had one specifically regarding the wholesome water and whether there was any statutory responsibility of Scottish Water to also help in that front. Specifically with regards to maybe a community with a dozen houses that have a private water supply. I think in the past the individual householders have possibly had filters and whatever and had funding for that, but there's a scheme to actually to bring a better solution to the whole community. Is the BTS likely to be able to be used for something like that?
Mr. Lynch?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, my understanding is that would apply in those circumstances. Environmental health colleagues administer a scheme to provide additional support. They administer on behalf of the Scottish Government, and I'm aware that we work closely with environmental health in dealing with some of these issues around wholesome private supplies to very rural areas. So that would encompass the wider Scottish Government scheme as well.
Councillor Dempster?
Thanks, Chair. A couple of observations, just John and Lloyd need to answer them. It's on the Trusted Trader scheme. And the first one is to increase consumer choice. I worry that some traders will maybe no enter this scheme because they have to pay £200 a year and they'll be confident at the outset what they get for their money. And it isn't always there's always an economic a choice to be made. And if we were to have very few registered on this scheme, I would worry that the council isn't perceived then as promoting certain businesses in opposition to others, because we make a conscious decision not to promote businesses but to make customers aware of what businesses are available. So I don't know whether you're going to list all the businesses and then highlight the ones that are trusted traders. I don't know. The other concern I would have is that you're going to hand out surveys and list the completed surveys on a council website. And experience tells most of us that when folk fill in surveys is because they're dissatisfied, and we're going to be listing a list of dissatisfied customers and responses to works when the traders don't have the opportunity to rebut these allegations, because they will be in print on a council website. And I think maybe the best thing we can look for, because I'm quite comfortable with the proposal, is get an interim report on how it's actually working, what the take-up is, what the outcomes are, so that if there's a problem, we address it at an early stage rather than waiting a year to see what happens.
Mr. Lodge?
Thanks, Chair. In terms of the dynamic of how this scheme would operate, the Trusted Trader scheme would provide a suite of promotional material about the scheme for the contractors to advertise themselves. So we wouldn't be out there actively advertising for individual contractors. Part of the registration fee in the scheme would be they'd be assessed, there'd be an appraisal. If they qualify and they get on the scheme, they would then be essentially have some kind of accreditation, and they would carry out their own promotion around that. So we wouldn't be separately, the council would not be promoting individual traders, but we'd give them the tools for them to do the job themselves. So that would be the issue there. In terms of getting customer feedback and surveys, it would need that part of that process for the trade and standards officers would be to assess whether that was just quite low level, poor customer service or very good customer service, or whether there's actually been some kind of potential breach of the consumer legislation, in which case they would then go down a different route. So it would very much depend on the feedback that the trade and standards staff got. But as I say, they're very confident. They've done a lot of preparatory work on this, and they're confident that the scheme will work locally. But we will be bringing interim reports back. At the very least, we'll give an update at the next annual scheme of assistance update. If there's a need for a report before that next annual report next March, then there'd be no difficulty in doing that as well.
Councillor Peacock?
Thank you, Chair. 3.13 budget allocations in the table set out there, whereas £10,000 allocated to information advice, web development and training. And I was just wondering, what would the training be for? I mean, would it be focused on officers dealing with all these schemes of assistance and such like that, or would some of it be guided towards applicants who are putting in applications for the grants for these schemes, just as what the training would be involved with?
Thanks, Chair. No, that would be officer training linked to changes in legislation, changes in Scottish Government guidance, so it would be internal training opportunities for the staff.
Councillor Carruthers?
Just to show support for the trusted trader scheme, sorry. I know Jim's bringing up particular points about it. I can understand where he's coming from, but I don't think we're the first local authority in Scotland to do this by any means. I think it's been in other local authorities, it's been spread out. It's been quite successful as well. As an example, in my own village, when the flooding was going on down in Gloucester, Somerset way, some of the travelling community ended up in my village and they were punting the doors, and a family came to me where they're in their 70s and they'd felt very pressurised in towards being getting their drives tarmacked, and when they phoned up the following day to say, listen, don't bother coming, again pressurised again, and the police were involved. So I think it's a good scheme. It's not a lot of money for what we're actually we'll get back in return as far as community benefit, and very much about consumer protection. Totally support it.
If members have no more questions, I'll turn to my left. Councillor Peacock.
Sorry, Chair. Just one point of clarification in recommendation 2.3. Agree to address the shortfall of 236,000. Whereas 3.13 at the end of the report it states as a potential shortfall within the budget of 131,000, and just clarification as to which it is.
Mr. Lynch.
Sorry, Councillor Peacock, where was the reference to 130?
It's 3.132 on page 11 of the report.
Yeah, sorry, that's an error. The correct shortfall is in the table of 3.13.1. So the bottom line of that box, shortfall from council tax, apologies, that reference to 13.2 is incorrect, and that will need to be amended. The shortfall is 236,000.
If I can turn to my left and get a summing up of everything that's been discussed before I turn to recommendations.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I've been keenly trying to capture your debate here. In addition to what's in the recommendations, I've noted that the recommendation 2.4 should be expanded to cover 3.5 and 3.6. There's to be a report back looking at the accreditation of the landlords and the BTS scheme, and I don't think there was anything else to be added specifically to recommendations, but I'll make sure that anything was captured.
The only thing I picked up on was the request for information to be sent to committee members about the split for the rural versus the urban spend on the care and repair. If members are content that we get that via email rather than it coming in a separate report.
Yeah, that would be an operational matter and appear in the minute. Members were happy.
If members are content, we'll now go to recommendations. 2.1, 2.2, agree the budget allocations to support. 2.3, 2.4 amended to say arrangements as detailed on 3.5 and 3.6 of the report. 2.5, 2.6, 2.7. Agreed previously, so Councillor Carson doesn't get into trouble. Thanks, members. We'll go to item 5. It's the report on the Dumfries Town Centre pilot housing regeneration area. It's Mr. O'Neill that's speaking to this. Have you got anything you wish to add, Mr. O'Neill?
Thanks, Chair. Nothing to add to the report in front of members, and happy to answer any questions that people may have.
Councillor Smith?
One or two just brief points. Just in general, the Obviously, the report proposes to allocate certain funding from the £200,000 set aside. But the report also says that we've had 9 applications for that funding and we've got 11 further ones to be considered. I'm just interested as to what sort of value those applications currently are, because obviously the scheme can provide grants of up to £10,000. I don't envisage that they will give everybody £10,000, but presumably 9 plus 11 times £10,000 is the budget basically. So I'm presuming that we're well below what we've got in applications so far that allows us to effectively reallocate some of this particular funding. So I'm just curious as to what value the applications are so far. In terms of the actual update report, which is Appendix 2, just in action number 3, I'm just curious as to what's the timescale likely to be for that particular proposal. I'm conscious that if you look at the proposal in Friars Vennel at the moment that DGHP are taking forward, that seems to have taken an awful long time to get to any sort of work even beginning, and I'm just curious as to what the timescale is, because obviously I think we had, was it January or September 2014 in the target date, and that's obviously creeping up on us, so I'm just curious as to what the timescale was likely to be for that. In terms of the, the update on the iron railings thing, I think that's been a really positive development, and I fully support the proposal to allocate additional funding. I think it's actually made a real difference in those properties that have benefited from that so far, and it'd be good to see other properties actually also benefiting. In terms of the update on bullet point 8, it kind of implies that because Unipart are moving, that problem's solved, but the particularly attractive building that they've left, it doesn't really solve that problem. So I'm wondering what we actually mean in terms of how we're actually still going to take forward improving the appearance of that area, because obviously it's not a fantastic site. In terms of 9, the again, it talks about the garden around the site entrance. I'm just curious, I can't remember it being told what that actual entrance is. We're talking about the entrance on Queen Street, and if that's the case, are we proposing to take any action to effectively clear that entrance at the moment? There's obviously a property next to the entrance that's actually had scaffolding on it longer than I've actually been a councillor, and lots of other things on the entranceway as well. So I'm just curious as to what action we're actually taking to try to improve that. We're putting a lot of effort, a lot of really good effort, a lot of really good work improving that street, but it only takes one property in an appalling condition to really bring the whole thing down, and that's certainly a property that I've got in mind. I think that's most of my points, I have to say. But I think other than that, I'm very supportive of the action that's being taken forward, and I think in particular what's encouraging is that the widespread consultation and discussion that's taking place with residents in that area. We get a lot of positive feedback from people that are really appreciative. I think Jim gave me an update on the fact that some of the street lighting is actually starting to go in place now, which again is something that came very much from local residents living in that area, and I think a lot of positive good work taking place there, and long may it continue.
Mr. O'Neill.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. In relation to the reprofiling of the grant, we have taken account of the amount of outstanding applications and have made an initial assessment of what they're likely to cost. So the proposed budget allocations will ensure that we're not actually refusing anyone a grant. The level of allocation up to the limit has tended to be smaller than we anticipated. So though the maximum level may be 10,000, it tends to be smaller numbers that actually work through in terms of the grants allocated to individual property owners. So rather than sit with a very large allocation under that budget heading, we took the view that that money could be better utilised in relation to other actions within the action plan. But as I say, the key point there is that we wouldn't be refusing applications because there isn't a budget available. We have taken that into account. In terms of the other questions that Councillor Smith raised in relation to the action plan, I'll just work my way through them. In relation to the gap site in Queen Street, there's a planning application currently being submitted by DGHP, and the site has now been purchased by DGHP as well. I think what I would say in relation to this is that this is likely to be on site quicker than the Vennel project because the site is much less complicated. And the outstanding issue with the project in Friars Vennel, and that's subject to report coming to this committee next month, is how the retail units will be funded as part of that development, and that's actually slowed down the process of getting that on site. Once that's resolved, DGHP are ready to go in the Friars Vennel site because it's already been out to tender. So if we can unlock the retail unit issue, that will allow that to proceed. So in terms of the Queen Street site, it remains on target, and as I understand the situation, once the planning application has been granted, and the advice that we're getting is that there aren't any major obstacles in the way of that happening, it will then go out to tender, and there will hopefully be a site start in the current financial year, is what we're anticipating. In terms of the Unipark site, yes, there are two elements to that problem. The first part of the problem was the large volume of traffic that was created by vans going up and down the street to access the spare parts from the warehouse. That aspect of the problem has now been solved, but what we're waiting on is that site being marketed by the property owners. It's one of these large-scale property owners, as we understand it, that own the building, like DTZ or a company like that. And if it's marketed for sale, I think what we'd be looking to do is include it in, try and purchase it through one of the RSLs, or recommend to this committee that it's purchased through one of the RSLs and include it in a future SHIP, with the idea being to redevelop that site. The problem is that we've got a conflicting land use there. We've got a heavy industrial use of that site and a warehouse use right slap bang in the middle of a residential area, and it's that land use conflict that's causing problems on the street and causing problems for local residents. So if the opportunity to arises to come up with a more permanent solution, I think that's the path that we'd like to go down, though we're not quite there yet because there are still some spare parts in the warehouse, and they've still to be relocated to the new site in Dumfries. But if the site becomes available, we'd certainly be speaking to RSLs and be looking to take a report to committee to try and resolve it more permanently. In terms of the garden at Scottish Power, we would be looking, to confirm with Councillor Smith, that it is the entrance on Queen Street. Scottish Power are actually very supportive of the street design project, and they're supportive of the idea of creating a community garden at the entrance to that site. There's a lot of kind of unutilised concrete at the entrance that isn't particularly attractive and gives it a bit of an industrial feel, and they are very keen to try and kind of soften up the entrance to their site. In relation to the property next to it, it is causing blight in the neighbourhood, and we've now met with colleagues in planning, and they have agreed to serve an amenity notice on that site, and that will be happening over the next 2 or 3 weeks. In effect, what that means is that the owner of the property is given a defined period of time that I think is around 28 days to take steps to clear that site and deal with the variety of debris that's around it, both within and around the property. And if that action isn't taken, the council is then empowered to go in and do the work itself. And that is the route that we're currently going down at present. We have tried to have discussions with the property owner on numerous occasions and over a prolonged period of time, and it's not resulted in any action being taken. So we're going down a more formal notice route, because we can't have one property in a key location in the street undermining the good work that's happening elsewhere. So that's exactly what we're doing there. And I think that covered Councillor Smith's question.
Councillor Geddes.
Well, I'm glad to hear from Mr O'Neill's answer that action is being taken. I'm not sitting here today, Chair, and going to advocate the council being draconian merely for the sake of it. But quite frankly, this council, as planning authority, has a reputation of not addressing blight and dereliction in the fashion that it should be doing. And I'm sure, as a former fellow member of the Wigton Area Regulatory Committee, Councillor Forster, would agree with me. That committee, to a large extent in the Dumfries and Galloway context, pioneered the use of Section 179 notices, among others. And I would have to be honest and say that on occasions it felt as though we're having to drag the planners into the room screaming and kicking, to get them to address the issues and the problems. And that principle applies whether it's in this part of Dumfries or wherever it is. And quite frankly, in my view, we've not been nearly as well served as we've been entitled as elected members to be over the years in that regard. In relation to the Unipart building, as I say, I'm delighted to hear Jim's response, because I would also, if you look at that, that's box 8 and page 26. If you look diametrically across the page at box 15, take enforcement action under the terms of Housing Scotland Act in relation to a small number of property owners who are not maintaining their buildings properly. Well, you cannot treat one differently, I would suggest, from the others. And to me, we should be adopting a much more rigorous approach. One at the bottom of the page there, box 12 on page 26, the owners of the Queensberry Hotel. Is there any way, following on from what Jim has said in relation to the Unipart building, is there any way that a similar, course of action could be contemplated with a view to, bringing that into use as well for future housing purposes? Quite frankly, Chair, in the days of the of Wigton District Council as housing authority in Stranraer, there was not a property come on the market but what the District Council did not look at the possibility of acquiring it and using it for future housing development. And the blunt fact of the matter is that more often than not they were successful. We'll get rid of dereliction at the bottom of Queen Street, we bought the former Inch Motors building and all the rest of it, and all these were brought back into use and, very often demolished and redeveloped. And that was a small rural housing authority with a limited budget, nothing like, the resources available to an authority such as Dumfries and Galloway Council. And it's about time perhaps that as elected members we showed a bit more commitment and got these proposals pushed on.
Mr O'Neill.
Yep, thanks, Chair. In terms of engaging with local residents to implement the actions within the action plan, the view that we took was an initial positive engagement, offering a variety of carrots to local property owners to get them to participate positively in the scheme. And I think it's fair to say we're now at the point where we've identified specific property owners that are failing to engage properly in the scheme, and we are now at the point of starting to take enforcement action under the terms of the Housing Scotland Act 2006, and we've identified a number of key properties that will be the focus of that action. So as well, the action that's been taken that, in response to the question that Councillor Smith raised is under planning legislation, and it's an amenity notice. However, that's not appropriate where there are large building condition issues, and we have identified the properties that are causing blight and are at the initial stages of discussing taking more formal action with legal services in relation to a number of specific properties. So that action's actually coming to the fore now after the initial positive, do you want to participate, do you want to work cooperatively with the council? It's clear in some cases that that is definitely not the case, and we will be taking enforcement action against those property owners. And we will not hesitate to do that, to be honest, because of the impact that they can have in the area. In terms of the Queensberry Hotel, my understanding is that it's currently in administration, but it has been sold or marketed as a going concern, and that may inhibit our ability to actually do anything about it in terms of a change of land use from commercial to residential. However, we are monitoring the situation, and if it became empty again, that would be an entirely different situation, and we could consider the action that Councillor Geddes is suggesting.
Councillor Geddes.
Grateful to Mr O'Neill for his response, sir. Let me make it clear for the record, I'm totally supportive of adopting, the carrot approach in the first instance. But, when that doesn't work, it's the old adage. You've got to use the stick, albeit with maybe on occasions a certain degree of reluctance, but you want to do it. Because the blunt fact of the matter is that certain people will not engage with the council unless they're compelled to do so. And we owe it to the people who are having to live round about in the vicinity of these properties.
Just for my own interest, Councillor Smith's comment about the building that has scaffolding round about it, when I heard Mr O'Neill say that they were going to be taking, or his colleagues in planning were going to be taking, my ears pricked up, and I see Councillor Foster's ears pricked up as well. We have a building in our ward that is exactly the same. I will be speaking to planning to see where the difference is between the one in Queen Street and the one in the village in Councillor Foster and I's ward. And if there's no difference, I'll be asking the planners to do exactly the same. If there's no other question, Councillor Carruthers.
It's more inquisitive in regards to recommendation 2.6. So, do we have any feedback from the local members in that area, what their views are on 2.6?
Yeah, that was my last question before I actually turn to recommendations. Is there any discussion that members wish to have regarding the request from Lowburn Community Council?
I have no idea what the other local members think of the particular request. I think there's 2 points. First of all, it's not actually in the conservation area, and we went through quite a detailed consultation as to what would and wouldn't be in the conservation area, and a decision was taken where the line was drawn, and that's what the conservation area is. So I think to impose conservation rules in non-conservation area, desirable as it may be, is frankly not in the spirit of the decision on where the conservation area would be. The other question would, I suppose, be what would the actual financial impact be, because clearly meeting conservation area standards, if you like, very desirable as it is an awful lot more expensive than meeting normal requirements that are out with a conservation area. So effectively you may have the impact being that less properties could benefit from that. So I would be concerned about it. I don't see anything wrong with us very strongly encouraging people to meet requirements within a conservation area, but I don't think we should put that restriction on it, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, Councillor Geddes?
I would support that view.
Yeah, just if it could be clarified for me, under 2.6, the request would be to introduce new grant conditions. Obviously, if owners of properties within the area that they're wanting to be extended to for the regeneration area, if they didn't ask for a grant, would actually be penalising people that would be actually paying for it themselves. So you could have two different standards of regeneration going on in the same piece of the street. Is my thinking right, that if you don't go for the grant, you would only have to apply for, you would only have to abide by normal planning rules?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. For me, one of the key considerations is the housing regeneration area. The population that lives within that area is generally characterised by people in relatively low incomes, and the application of higher standards in relation to certain components of buildings, the best example being the price difference between UPVC sash and case style double glazing replacements and actual traditional hardwood sash and case replacements, quite significant. And if you introduce those requirements into an area where people are in relatively low incomes, it could actually have the effect of people not uptaking grants and therefore the council not achieving its ambitions in terms of improving the condition of the housing stock within that location. And then there's the broad issue of equity, in that an owner-occupier that doesn't want to apply for a grant is probably more free to replace it in the way that they wish, as long as it meets with building standards and any planning requirements, but they certainly wouldn't be required to meet the standards that would be applied in a conservation area. So you would have a broad issue of equity there.
Councillor Smith?
Probably if somebody did, however, put forward an application that did meet the standard that you'd expect in a conservation area, they wouldn't be penalised in any way. They would be able to get a grant in the same way as anybody else.
Mr O'Neill?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. What we're doing is actively trying to encourage people, for example, if they require new windows or a new door, is to try and encourage people to replace them with the components that were the traditional part of the building. But what you find is that people actually want a more modern standard of door that's more secure, that's more energy efficient, etc., etc. And there's a bit of a tension there. But we would actually, as a starting point, say, would you replace it with sash and case double glazing? And would you have a traditional door? But what we're finding is that people are actually not wanting to replace it with those components. So right away that creates a difficulty. And we can't compel people to do it. And there's no planning basis to compel people to do it. So what we're trying to do is get the best outcomes that we can, but that involves a negotiation and discussion with the property owner.
If there's no other questions, move to recommendations. Recommendations 2.1, are members content to note the progress? 2.2, agree the reallocation. 2.3, agree the reallocation. 2.4, agree the reallocation. 2.5, agree the reallocation of the 40,000. And 2.6, I'll take direction from members, but my feeling is that members would not support the introduction of new grant conditions requiring recipients of funding to undertake works to the standards similar to the finish applied in the conservation area. Am I right in the feeling of the meeting? Thank you. I have no other business that's urgent. If members wish to see pictures of the National Housing Trust properties, they are available to my left-hand side. Unfortunately, we still can't get the video to work. I thank members for attending. The meeting's now closed. Oh, we can actually put them up on the screen if you want to see them.